So hopefully between us on this panel, we can try and give a snapshot of what's been happening in the cultural sector over the past 20 months or so and how we see the priorities going forward. Seeley mentioned the unprecedented outpouring of solidarity among arts workers that we've witnessed. And I just want to acknowledge that various new networks and coalitions of art workers, formal and informal formations, have been springing up. And Artists for Palestine has been involved in many, but by no means all of the campaigns that I'm going to mention today. Just want to register that. So I'm going to talk about cultural boycott in the UK arts and starting with some examples. I'll cover some nuts and bolts about what cultural boycott means in practice and what it doesn't mean. And hopefully Alia will develop some of that a bit more from PACB's perspective. And I'm going to mention a few principles that help us to campaign smartly and strategically. And I'll offer some thoughts on next steps and how we escalate the cultural boycott of Israel. So, yeah, again, as Seeley suggested, there's an irreversible cultural shift in public attitude towards the Israeli regime, and this was evidenced in so many of Glastonbury's acts were giving voice to the anger and grief that so many of us are feeling and offering a really needed and meaningful catharsis and a sense of solidarity and hope amid the genocide denial of our political and media establishment. And more than this, artists are often articulating urgent calls for justice and accountability, which we're really desperate to have articulated on platforms and that we're not hearing from our leaders. So it's my belief that artists aren't blessed with greater insights than the rest of the population, but right now they are connecting with their audiences and directly addressing the genocide, where establishment politicians and journalists are either denying or justifying the genocide. So I think whether as artists or as arts workers, I think everybody has a stake in culture in the broader sense of the word. Just as everyone has a stake in questions of rights, justice, and liberation. And we really need cultural institutions to adequately reflect that shift in attitudes amongst its artists and audiences if they are to be at all relevant and prepared for the future. So I'm just going to mention some recent campaigns and perhaps three different strands of cultural campaigning. The first is arts workers and organizations refusing to work with complicit Israeli cultural institutions. So you may have read that in November last year, a coalition of more than 7,000 authors, book workers and publishers publicly pledged to refuse to publish with complicit Israeli institutions, publishing institutions. So complicit Israeli institutions is any cultural institution that does not explicitly and publicly support the full menu of Palestinian rights, which is the vast majority of Israeli institutions, with a few notable exceptions. So we're going to be seeing much more of that. So where previously it was about artists refusing to go to Israel or to appear in Israel, this is artists saying, I don't want my work going. I'm not going to partner with distribution in Israel. I don't want my work going there. Secondly, dismantling the arts and business nexus. So there's this new report, UN report authored by Francesca Albanese called From Economy of Occupation to Economy of Genocide. And that shows how corporations are reaping profits from grave crimes against the Palestinian people. So by accepting money from these corporate entities, major UK institutions, museums, etc., are providing reputational cover to sectors that are complicit in criminal behaviour. So one of the corporations that's mentioned is Barclays, which has been bankrolling Israel's genocide. So I'll just mention a few of the campaigns against Barclays. So last year, you may have heard that Bans Boycott Barclays campaign was launched, and 163 artists dropped out of the Great Escape Music Festival lineup in Brighton, and then that spread across other UK music festivals that were sponsored by Barclays. And then there's Cultural Workers Against Genocide have led an ongoing campaign for Islington's Sadler's Wells Theatre to end its partnership with Barclays. And it's notable that Barclays chairman sits on the board at Sadler's Wells. So one of the demands also is that he should not be sitting on the board. And then more recently, that is ongoing, that campaign. Britain's leading playwright Carol Churchill publicly walked away from the iconic Donmar Warehouse in London, the theatre, over Barclays' sponsorship of that theatre. And then in June, hundreds of actors and theatre workers signed a letter endorsing Churchill's stand and demanding the Donmar dump Barclays. So we'll have to watch this space and see what happens there. So the other strand I wanted to mention was ethical policies and institutions adopting ethical policies so that UK cultural spaces can be made into apartheid-free spaces. So I'll just mention the Artists' Union in England passed motions in its last AGM declaring the union an apartheid-free zone, and it endorsed PACB, Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, and urged sector-wide pressure on arts organisations to do the same. The TUC passed a motion proposed by Equity, the Actors' Union, on committing to protecting arts workers' right to freedom of expression. That's really, really important. And we have, I think, Tahrid might speak a little bit about her work in Equity today. And Arts Workers for Palestine Scotland recently announced that 200 Scottish cultural organisations, collectives and groups have endorsed PACB's cultural boycott of Israel. So this work is often slow work, but building for policies is building for the long term of supporting this work of supporting cultural organisations to adopt ethical policies so that they can ensure basic ethical standards by committing to refuse to partner with individuals or institutions that are verifiably complicit in, advocate for, or whitewash grave violations of international law, or racism, or racial violence. And we think that's kind of like should be a baseline. So I'll just say a little bit about the cultural boycott of Israel. So the group that I've been a member of, I'm a founding member of, has been working to mobilise arts workers and organisations to refuse to normalise Israel's regime through partnerships or sponsorships with bodies that are complicit with the oppression of Palestinian people. So the cultural boycott is in the first instance a collective withdrawal of labour by culture workers. And conversely, cultural boycott also involves art workers and audiences pressing arts institutions to end their partnerships with bodies that are complicit with apartheid or with genocide. Again, this is a basic ethical position, and I believe the only tenable position for institutions that pay lip service to anti-racism and to universal values. An important part of this is that our work is a response to the Palestinian call for the cultural boycott of Israel. When we adopt boycott measures, we always remind our audience that we do so because an oppressed people has asked us to adopt this as a minimal step towards ending their oppression. So this is a Palestinian-led movement, and we follow guidelines devised over years by PACB so that we can act ethically and consistently across the movement. And that really helps us identify what it is we're doing and keep focused on our goals. And then just in terms of how it works in practice, it's really important and can't be said enough times that the Palestinian cultural boycott has never been a blanket boycott. It's never called for a boycott of individual artists. So it explicitly targets complicity and not identity, and it focuses on institutions rather than individuals. So this means that individual artists are never subject to boycott simply because they hold an Israeli passport, nor because they are in receipt of local arts funding at home in the way that I might receive a grant from the Arts Council of England, for example. Aside from anything, this would capture Palestinian artists who are citizens of Israel. Cultural projects do become subject to boycotts when a UK venue partners with the Israeli embassy or with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, bodies, these kind of bodies that promote Israeli culture abroad. So I guess the other thing I wanted to say was about being smart and strategic in our campaigning, and to remember that the point of boycott and divestment is not for us to feel pure or untainted by global capital, and that boycotts are not an end in themselves. We want to build power to affect policy change and not merely to score points or feel good about symbolic gestures. So in arts and culture, when we think about institutional complicity, we have to remember that our aim is to grow the space that we operate in. We don't want to shrink it. We don't want to close down every organisation that has not made a solidarity statement for Palestine, even though we're really frustrated that so many have not said anything. So we make strategic choices about the targets we choose. And the kind of principles that help with that are thinking about the level of complicity, so the potential to engage a broad-based support through compelling and clear links to the regime or to the genocide, make a campaign a viable one. Impact, having a sense of what a meaningful impact will look like for us, and the potential for coalition building. Intersectional alliances makes us stronger, and it's also the right thing to do. And working and gradualness, the principle of gradualness means sometimes we have to go step by step. Well, actually, always we go step by step. We don't jump from A to Z. And also context sensitivity. So what's possible in one country is different from what's possible in another country. With a small institution, it might be different from how you engage with a large institution. And one other thing I wanted to say that's important, that the target of our campaigns are nearly always the decision makers, the leadership. We never want to be targeting the workers at culture institutions or their audiences. We want to take those people with us. So we want to give every opportunity for those people to join with us. And finally, when in doubt, we consult with partner organizations or other organizations who will have knowledge or specialist or local information about a particular institution and what's going on there, and what we can do, how we could engage. I'm probably coming towards the end. I mean, I think the idea of going forward and escalating this, I'm very keen on the work of building better policies for cultural institutions, ethical policies. And we're all desperate for things to happen right now, but we have to think of this as a long-term struggle that needs to go forward. And by building policies in institutions, we can build a sustainable and just future. So we want to make the case for, and we want to support cultural organizations to adopt ethical policies when it comes to how they engage, or how they what they're willing to engage with, and where they're willing to take money from. And hopefully this will accelerate once it becomes the norm. This is slow work while we're having to explain everything from the beginning. But this is something that cultural workers can lead on with institutions they are closest to, starting with the smallest and then building up. And the final thing I was going to say was, lest there be any doubt, we are and must be pro-culture, pro-art. Our aim is to pressure and support festivals and arts organisations to be better and do better. We're not here to burn them down, as some like to claim. If we can't imagine a world where festivals and theatres are not sponsored by corporations that are responsible for planetary and human degradation and death, then we as a society have an imagination problem, not an arts funding problem. Thank you.